Ethan Walker had always been the kind of student who blended naturally into the background. He walked to class with his backpack slung over one shoulder, kept his earbuds in, even when he wasn't listening to anything, and never made a big deal out of himself. On most days, after his engineering lectures, he would take the same quiet route through the courtyard toward the parking lot. He liked it because it was peaceful and usually empty, giving him a moment to breathe after a long day of formulas, diagrams, and lab work. That afternoon, the air was warm but comfortable, and a soft breeze moved through the tall trees near the edge of campus. Students walked in small groups, chatting about assignments, weekend plans, or anything else they could think of to distract themselves from classes. Ethan moved at a relaxed pace, enjoying the break between lectures and the walk to his car. He had no idea anything unusual was about to happen. Nothing in his day hinted that trouble was waiting just ahead. As he got closer to the parking lot, he noticed something off. Normally, the lot was filled with the sounds of car doors opening and closing, distant laughter, and the low hum of traffic from the nearby road. But today, those sounds were replaced with something louder revving motorcycle engines. The deep growling noise echoed between the walls of the lot, and it immediately stood out. Ethan slowed his steps slightly. He wasn't alarmed, just curious. Motorcycles on campus were nothing strange, but the sound coming from the lot wasn't just one bike. It was several, and they were being revved in a way that didn't seem casual or friendly. It felt more like someone trying to make a point. As he reached the entrance, he saw them. A group of riders, 5 in total, had pulled into the center of the parking area. Their bikes were lined up diagonally, blocking 2 lanes and making it impossible for anyone to drive in or out. The men stood near their motorcycles talking loudly, laughing in a way that wasn't cheerful, but more mocking. A few students nearby looked uncomfortable. Some glanced at them and quickly walked away. Others pretended not to notice. Ethan paused for a moment, watching. He didn't recognize the men. They didn't look like students. Their loud presence didn't match the campus atmosphere at all. He adjusted the strap on his backpack and kept walking. His car was parked on the far end, so he would have to pass near them. He didn't feel threatened, but he also didn't want to get involved in anything. Conflict was the last thing on his mind. But just as he took a few more steps, something happened that made him stop. A young student was standing near one of the bikes. He was small-framed, wearing glasses, and holding a stack of textbooks against his chest. He seemed nervous, glancing between the bikers and his car, which was parked right behind them. He was trying to squeeze through the small space between the motorcycles without touching them. Ethan didn't know him, but he recognized the look on his face, uncertain, worried. And trying to avoid making a mistake, the student stepped carefully. But his backpack brushed lightly against one of the bike's handlebars. The movement was tiny, nearly unnoticeable, but it was enough to set off a reaction. The owner of the bike snapped his head toward the student. "Hey!" he shouted. The sudden loud voice made several people in the lot turn their heads. The student froze. "Sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean." Before he could finish, the man stepped closer, towering over him. "Watch what you're doing. You touch my bike again, and you're going to regret it."
Ow.
The man's tone wasn't playful or teasing. It carried a weight that made the student's face pale instantly. Ethan felt an instinctive pull in his chest. He didn't like the tone. He didn't like the way the man stepped toward the smaller student. Even from several feet away, the interaction felt wrong. Still, Ethan didn't move yet. He wanted to see how the situation developed before stepping in. Sometimes things looked tense for a moment, but settled quickly. But that didn't happen. Instead of walking away, the biker leaned closer, almost as if he wanted to intimidate the student more. The others in his group watched, some smiling at the tension building between them. The young student tried to apologize again, but his voice shook, and his hands clutched his books tighter. "It was an accident," he said softly. "I just need to get to my car." The man laughed, then learned to walk without bumping into things. One of the other riders chimed in from behind. "Maybe he needs glasses thicker than those." The group laughed, but the student didn't move. He seemed unsure whether to walk around them or stay still. Ethan felt his jaw tighten slightly. He didn't like bullying of any kind, especially when it involved someone who clearly wasn't looking for trouble. He took a few steps forward, not making a scene, just moving a bit closer to get a clearer view. The biker noticed the student still standing there. "What? You gonna cry now?" he said. The student shook his head, but didn't speak. Several other students in the parking lot were watching from a distance. No one spoke. No one moved. They kept their distance, unsure what to do. Ethan knew that feeling well. He had been in plenty of tense situations in the past, far more serious than this. The difference was that here, he wasn't wearing a uniform or surrounded by trained people. He was just another student. And intervening in a civilian situation always required caution. He didn't want things to escalate. And he definitely didn't want the situation to become physical. But he also knew when something wasn't right. This was clearly one of those moments. As the biker stepped even closer, the student backed up instinctively, nearly stumbling over his own feet. The man's shadow fell over him, and the tone in his voice grew sharper. "Didn't you hear me? Move your car or move yourself. Don't touch the bike again." The student nodded quickly, but there was no space to go around. The bikes were parked too close together. Ethan exhaled slowly. The discomfort he felt earlier shifted into something more certain, a sense that he needed to step in before things went any further. He walked a little closer, still calm, still quiet, before he got within speaking distance. One of the bikers glanced his way. "What are you looking at?" he asked loudly, as if trying to pull him into the conflict. Ethan didn't reply. He kept his expression neutral, his steps steady. He ignored the comment and focused on the student. "You all right?" he asked in a calm voice. The student nodded, but it was clear from his trembling hands that he wasn't. The biker who had been confronting him turned to Ethan. "This your problem?" he asked. "No," Ethan said simply. "But he looks like he's just trying to get to his car." The biker smirked. "He can wait." Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't square his shoulders or act aggressive. He kept it simple. "There's enough space for everyone. No need to make this harder than it is." Some of the students watching from a distance looked relieved that someone had stepped in. Others looked nervous, worried things might get worse. The biker walked closer to Ethan now, standing in front of him. He looked him up and down, sizing him up. Ethan kept his posture relaxed, his hands at his sides. "You've got something to say about how we park?" the biker asked. "No," Ethan replied. "Just saying everyone's trying to get through the day. No need to scare anyone." The biker let out a sarcastic laugh. "We're just talking." But Ethan had seen enough interactions like this to know that just talking wasn't really what was happening. The student behind the biker looked trapped, unsure whether to move or stay still. And the tension in the air hadn't eased. Ethan stayed calm, hoping his presence alone would be enough to settle things. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want attention. He just wanted the student to get out of the situation safely. For a brief second, it seemed like the moment might pass. The biker looked at Ethan, then back at his friends, as if deciding whether to push the situation or let it drop. The student took a small step back, trying to slip away quietly. For a moment, it looked like he might make it. But as he moved, Hayes' elbow lightly brushed the same handlebar again. The biker snapped his head back toward him instantly. Ethan's heart sank. He knew this wasn't going to end smoothly. He stepped slightly forward, ready to make sure things didn't go any further, hoping his calm presence could keep the situation from spiraling. In that moment, everything felt very still. The air, the students watching, even the sound of distant traffic hit all seemed to pause. The bikers hadn't realized it yet. But the quiet guy in the parking lot wasn't someone who would simply stand by and watch someone get pushed around. He wasn't looking for trouble, but he wasn't going to walk away from someone who needed help either, and this was only the beginning of what would become a moment no one on that campus would soon forget. Ethan stood there in the parking lot, feeling the tension settle around him like a heavy blanket. The air still carried the smell of exhaust from the motorcycles, and the soft breeze that had been pleasant a few minutes earlier now seemed to move too quietly, as if even nature didn't want to interrupt what was happening. The group of bikers watched him with a mix of curiosity and annoyance, not expecting anyone to step in. Students in the distance stayed frozen, unsure whether to walk away or stay and see what happened next. The young student who had brushed against the bike looked even more nervous now. His hands were shaking around the books he held, and his breaths came out short and shallow. Ethan gave him a small nod, a silent way of telling him it was going to be all right. He didn't know if the student believed him, but he hoped it offered at least a little comfort. The lead biker stepped a bit closer, staring at Ethan like he was trying to figure out what kind of person he was dealing with. Ethan didn't look threatening. He wasn't physically imposing, didn't have a wild expression, and wasn't raising his voice. He looked like any regular student who had just finished a long class. And maybe that's why the biker didn't see him as someone worth taking seriously. "You really want to get involved?" the man asked, his voice steady but firm. Ethan kept his tone calm, almost gentle. "No one wants problems here. He's just trying to get to his car. That's all." The biker's jaw tightened slightly, as if he didn't appreciate being corrected in front of his friends. But Ethan wasn't trying to challenge him. Just to lower the temperature of the situation, "People need to learn to watch where they're going," the man said. Glancing back at the student, he apologized. Ethan replied, "Accidents happen." The biker's friends shifted behind him. Some folded their arms, others leaned against their bikes, watching like spectators waiting to see what would happen next. The energy in the group felt unsettled, not explosive, but charged in a way that made the whole moment feel fragile. One wrong word could shift everything. Ethan wasn't afraid, but he was very aware. He had been in tense moments before, and he knew the difference between someone who wanted to fight and someone who was simply acting tough because they had an audience. These bikers didn't seem like they wanted real trouble, they just wanted to be noticed. They wanted to feel in control of the moment. Still, that didn't make the situation harmless. The young student adjusted his glasses nervously and tried to step aside again. His movements were small, careful, almost like he was afraid to breathe too loudly. He shifted to the right, but the bikes were parked too close together, and there wasn't enough space for him to slip by without brushing against one again. Ethan noticed and took a slightly wider stance, making himself more visible so the bikers couldn't ignore his presence. "You can give him a little room," Ethan said calmly. "Let him pass, and everyone gets on with their day." The biker looked at Ethan for a long moment. It wasn't a glare, but more of a measuring look, like he was testing how far Ethan was willing to go. And Ethan could see it. He could also see a flicker of something else in the man's expression. Maybe surprise? Maybe confusion? Maybe curiosity about why someone so quiet and unassuming would choose to involve himself in something that wasn't his responsibility. Before the biker could respond, another one in the group spoke up. "Man, why are you even bothering?" He bumped the bike. "He should watch where he walks." Ethan turned his head slightly to look at the man, but didn't say anything right away. He didn't want to get drawn into a back-and-forth argument. That would only make the tension grow. He kept his voice level when he finally answered. "He's not trying to cause trouble. He's just scared." The young student nodded slightly, almost grateful someone understood what he was feeling. The biker closest to Ethan gave a small smirk. Though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Scared people should pay more attention," he said. Ethan didn't react. Instead, he addressed the student directly. "Go ahead. Take your time." The student hesitated but slowly began to move again. Ethan stepped slightly to the side, giving him a clearer path. He hoped the bikers would take the hint. Maybe, now that someone had spoken up, they would decide the moment wasn't worth dragging out. For a second, it seemed like that might happen. The biker stepped back half an inch, just enough to show he wasn't going to block the way completely. The student shifted his weight, preparing to step around him. But then one of the other bikers let out a sharp laugh. "Look at that," he said loudly, pointing at the student's trembling hands. "He looks like he's about to drop his books." The group chuckled. The student flinched at the sound and stopped moving again. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Staying calm, even though the situation was clearly dragging out longer than it needed to. "Let him go," Ethan said quietly. The main biker turned to him again. "You act like you're his big brother or something." "No," Ethan replied. "Just someone who doesn't like seeing people picked on." The biker studied him for a moment. The parking lot seemed to quiet down again, the sunlight reflecting off the motorcycle's shiny surfaces. A few more students gathered at the far corner, whispering, trying to understand what was happening. Ethan could almost feel their worry. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially in a moment like this. He preferred to stay in the background to avoid drawing unnecessary eyes toward him. But he also couldn't ignore the student in front of him. Finally, the biker stepped back a little. "Fine," he said. "Let him pass." The student didn't need to be told twice. He took a cautious step forward, his shoulders stiff, his breathing fast. Ethan watched him move, ready to help if anything happened. But the student managed to slip past the bikes without touching anything, and once he cleared the last motorcycle, he practically hurried toward his car. The relief on the student's face was visible even from a distance. He looked like someone who had just escaped a moment he wanted no part of. Ethan felt a small weight lift off his shoulders, too. Maybe now things could return to normal. He gave a polite nod to the bikers, hoping they would understand that he wasn't trying to challenge them or disrespect anyone. He just wanted things to stay peaceful. But the moment didn't shift the way he hoped. As soon as the student was out of the way, the biker who had confronted him turned back to Ethan. His expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't friendly either. It was somewhere between curiosity and irritation. "So," the man said, crossing his arms, "what's your deal?" Ethan blinked once, unsure what he meant. "I don't have a deal," he said. "You stepped in like you're someone important," the man continued. "I didn't step in to be important," Ethan said softly. "I stepped in so he didn't get overwhelmed." The biker tilted his head slightly. "Most people mind their business." "Maybe they're scared too," Ethan replied. The biker looked around. "You scared?" Ethan shook his head. "No." The biker studied his face again, as if trying to puzzle out how someone so calm could be so steady in a situation like this. People usually reacted with fear, panic, or tension, not quiet confidence. "What are you then?" the biker asked. "Just someone heading to his car," Ethan replied. One of the bikers in the back chuckled. "He talks like a teacher." Ethan smiled a little. "Not even close." The main biker lowered his arms and took a small step closer. But not in a threatening way, more like someone trying to understand something that didn't make sense. "You don't act scared," the man said. "Most people would." Ethan shrugged lightly. "Fear doesn't help anyone think clearly." "Big words," one of the bikers muttered. Ethan didn't respond to that. He didn't need to. Instead, he adjusted his backpack strap again and said, "If everything's settled, I'll be on my way." The biker raised an eyebrow. "Just like that?" "Yes," Ethan said simply. He didn't wait for permission. He took a step to walk past them. But before he could, the biker spoke again. "Hold up." Ethan paused, not turning around yet. His senses sharpened, not out of fear, but out of awareness. He didn't know what the man wanted, but the tone wasn't harsh. It was more like he wasn't done talking. Ethan turned his head slightly. "Is something wrong?" The biker didn't say anything for a moment. His expression had shifted from irritation to something else, maybe realization. "You didn't even raise your voice." The man said, "Not once." Ethan nodded. "No reason to." The biker studied him again. "You used to people listening to you or something?" Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to talk about his past, especially not here, especially not with strangers. He came to college to focus on school, to get a break from the world he had been part of before. Most people on campus didn't know anything about him except that he was quiet and stayed to himself. "I just try to keep things calm," Ethan said. Giving a non-committal answer, the biker seemed to think about that for a while. His posture relaxed, just a little. Whatever one of the other bikers said. "Can we go now?" But the main biker didn't move. He just kept looking at Ethan, as if trying to figure out what made him so calm in a moment that would have rattled most people. Finally, he took a small step back. "Fine, you do what you need to do," he said. Ethan gave a polite nod and started walking toward his car. Students watched him as he passed. Some looked relieved. Some looked impressed. Others looked surprised that such a quiet, regular guy could step into a moment like that without hesitation. Ethan didn't think about any of that. He walked calmly, unlocking his car and opening the door. His hands were steady, his breathing even. He didn't feel shaken. It was just another moment where he had to choose between staying silent or stepping in. And he had simply made the choice he believed was right. But as he settled into the driver's seat, he could feel the weight of the biker's eyes still on him, especially the leader's. Not in a threatening way, more in a curious way. Like the man had sensed something different about him, something he couldn't quite place. Ethan didn't know the next morning on campus felt completely normal on the surface. The sun was warm, the sky was bright, and the usual groups of students walked across the courtyard, holding coffee cups and backpacks, talking about assignments and weekend plans. It looked like an ordinary day. The kind Ethan had lived dozens of times since the semester began, but for him, the air felt a little different. Not heavy, not stressful, just different. He had slept fine, gone through his morning routine the same way he always did, and eaten breakfast without thinking too much about the events from the day before. He didn't see the moment in the parking lot as something extreme. To him, it was just a situation that needed a calm voice. Still, something told him the moment wasn't fully behind him yet. Ethan walked toward his first class, carrying his usual notebook and a quiet focus. He liked this early hour on campus before the hallways got crowded, before the cafeteria filled with noise, before the day really began. It gave him space to breathe. As he turned the corner of a main hallway, he noticed something unusual. A few students glanced at him, then quickly looked away. Another group near the wall whispered to each other while looking in his direction. It wasn't the kind of attention that made him uncomfortable, but it was clearly not something he was used to. He frowned slightly, wondering if he had forgotten something, maybe something on his shirt. Or maybe he had walked into class with the wrong backpack yesterday. But then he heard two students talking nearby, not loud, but loud enough for him to catch a few words. "That's him," one whispered. "Yeah. He's the one who stood up to them," the other replied. Ethan stopped for half a second. So people had seen more than he thought. He continued walking, pretending not to hear anything. The attention wasn't intense, but it was noticeable. He didn't like being the center of anything. His goal was always to stay out of the way, do his work, and move on. As he entered his classroom, a few heads turned. One student near the front gave him a small nod. The kind you give someone when you've heard something impressive about them. Ethan nodded back politely and took a seat near the middle. The lecture began like normal. The professor talked about formulas and structural design principles. Students typed notes or stared blankly at the board, depending on their level of interest. Ethan tried to stay focused, but every now and then he felt eyes on him. As if someone was trying to figure out who he really was, he kept his expression neutral. But inside, he felt a subtle mix of confusion and mild frustration. He didn't want the moment in the parking lot to turn into a story people exaggerated. He didn't want trouble, attention, or rumors. He just wanted peace. After class ended, Ethan walked outside toward the campus center to grab something to drink. He liked to take a few minutes between classes to clear his mind. The breeze felt nice as it passed through the open walkway, and students filled the area with their usual chatter. He stood in line for a drink, not thinking about anything except what he needed to do for his next class. But then he noticed someone walking toward him, a familiar face. Though he couldn't remember the name, it was the student from the parking lot. The young man approached slowly, clutching his backpack strap with one hand. His expression was nervous, but grateful. "Hi," he said quietly. Ethan turned slightly. "Hey," he replied with a small smile. "I just wanted to say thank you," the student said. "For yesterday. I didn't get the chance then." "It's all right," Ethan said gently. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad you're okay." The student nodded quickly. "I really was scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought they were going to make things worse." "They were just trying to act tough," Ethan said. "Don't worry about it." The student looked down for a second, then back up. "People have been talking about it. They said you didn't even raise your voice." Ethan exhaled lightly. "People talk more than they should." The student gave a small laugh. "Yeah, maybe. But still, thank you, really." Ethan nodded politely. Anytime. Just stay safe, okay? The student smiled, then walked away, leaving Ethan alone in line again. Ethan didn't dwell on the moment. He paid for his drink, stepped outside, and found a quiet bench where he could sit before his next class started. He took a sip.
Letting the cold drink settle his thoughts.
He had barely been sitting for a minute when he heard footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate ones. Ethan looked up, standing a few feet away. From him was the same biker from yesterday, not the whole group, just him. He was dressed differently today, wearing a simple jacket instead of the leather vest from the day before. His hair was tied back and he didn't look aggressive. His face didn't hold anger or annoyance. If anything, he looked thoughtful. Ethan blinked once, surprised but not startled. "You mind if I sit?" the man asked. Ethan gestured to the empty spot on the bench. "Go ahead." The biker sat down slowly, leaning forward slightly with his elbows resting on his knees. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Students walked by without paying much attention. The world continued like everything was normal. Then the man let out a long breath. "You're not what I expected." Ethan sipped his drink again, waiting. "What do you mean?" "You didn't freak out yesterday," the man said. "You didn't yell. You didn't back off. And you didn't look scared." Ethan shrugged. "There wasn't a reason to be." The biker let out a small laugh, not mocking, just surprised. "Most people wouldn't handle it like that." "Most people don't need to deal with situations like that," Ethan said quietly. The man turned his head slightly, as if trying to read Ethan's face. "Who are you?" "Just a student," Ethan replied. "That's not what I mean," the man said. "I've seen people who act tough. I've seen people who get nervous. You're neither. You're calm." To calm. Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at the ground, thinking. "Everyone has a past," he finally said. The biker nodded slowly. "So you've been through some things." "Everyone has," Ethan repeated. The man rested back against the bench. "My friends think you're some kind of professional or something." Ethan's expression remained calm. "I'm not." The man watched him for a moment, then asked, "Were you mad at us yesterday?" "No," Ethan said. "I just didn't want a student to feel scared." The biker nodded again, as if that answer made sense. "You know, we weren't trying to cause real trouble. We ride together. Sometimes we get loud, I guess." "I understand," Ethan said, "but I didn't like how he bumped my bike," the man added. "It was an accident," Ethan said gently. "Yeah." The man rubbed the back of his neck. "I was too hard on him. Didn't realize until later." Ethan didn't judge him. People react without thinking sometimes. The man looked at him again. "You didn't react without thinking." "I've had practice staying calm," Ethan said. The biker seemed to consider that deeply. Then he leaned back, breathing out slowly. "Well, I wanted to say something. Not sorry exactly, just, I get why you stepped in. You did the right thing." Ethan nodded once. "I appreciate that. You're really just a student." The biker asked again. "Yes," Ethan said. "But before that, I had a different path." The man waited, but Ethan didn't add anything more. After a long pause, the biker said, "You don't have to explain. Just wanted to understand what kind of person I ran into." Ethan gave a small smile. "Just someone who tries to stay out of trouble." The biker let out a genuine laugh. "Funny you stepped right into trouble yesterday?" "Sometimes trouble steps too close," Ethan replied. The biker stood up slowly. "Well, you got my respect. Not many people can say that." Ethan stayed seated, giving a polite nod. The man took a few steps away, then paused and turned back. "By the way, we'll be around. If anyone gives you problems about yesterday, let me know." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I can handle myself." "I can see that," the man said with a half smile. "But still, I owe you one." And with that, he walked away, blending into the flow of students around him. Ethan watched him go, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. He didn't want attention. He didn't want stories spreading. But it seemed like yesterday's encounter had already started something he couldn't control. He wasn't worried about the bikers. They didn't feel like a threat anymore. If anything, the leader seemed more curious than anything else. But Ethan knew this wasn't the end of it. Something told him the calm from yesterday wouldn't last forever. Sometimes a single moment, one brief encounter, opened a door to something much bigger, and whether he wanted it or not. That door had already opened. The moment the last biker stepped back, the whole parking lot went quiet. People who had been watching from behind cars and near the campus walkway slowly began to move again, like they were waking from a spell. A few whispered to each other, trying to understand what they had just seen. No one expected a simple college afternoon to turn into something that felt like a scene from a movie. And no one expected the quiet student who usually minded his own business to step forward the way he did. Ethan stood still for a moment. Not because he was scared or unsure, but because he wanted to make completely sure that the situation was over. His breathing was steady, his posture calm, and there was no anger on his face. You could tell he wasn't proud or trying to show off. He was simply making sure no one else got hurt. Rex, the biker who had been the most aggressive, stayed frozen in place. His friends watched him, confused, embarrassed, and unsure if they should try again. They knew they had already pushed things too far, and the last thing they wanted was another round. Rex looked at Ethan with a mix of frustration and disbelief. He wasn't used to being stopped, especially not by someone younger, smaller, and who didn't look like the kind of person who would stand up to him. But Ethan didn't look at him with anger. He simply said, in a calm, steady voice, "It's done. Leave now." There was no threat in his tone. He just sounded sure of himself. And somehow, that confidence felt heavier than any threat Rex could have thrown back at him. Rex clenched his jaw, but he didn't step forward again. The chain he had picked up earlier lay on the ground near his boot. He didn't reach for it. Instead, he looked around at the people watching, realizing how many phones were recording. The fear of being embarrassed online suddenly outweighed any desire to fight. He pulled his jacket straight, muttered something no one could hear, and signaled his group. They backed away slowly, each of them getting onto their bikes without saying a word. The engines roared as they rode off the campus, their loud exit sounding much weaker than their loud arrival. Once they were completely gone, the silence that followed felt almost unreal. Students slowly approached the spot where Ethan was standing. They didn't rush or overwhelm him, no one wanted to make him uncomfortable, but curiosity pulled them closer. A few of them whispered things like, "Did you see that? And how did he do that so fast?" Another said he didn't even look scared. Someone else added, "He saved that guy." The student who had been pushed to the ground earlier stepped forward, rubbing the back of his arm. He looked shaken but relieved. "Thank you," he said softly. "I really didn't know what to do." Ethan gave him a small nod. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yeah," the student replied. "Just surprised. I didn't think anyone would step in. I just didn't want things to get worse," Ethan said. His voice was humble, almost quiet, as if he didn't think he had done anything special. A few others asked him if he needed help or if they should call campus security. Ethan simply shook his head. "They'll come anyway," he said. Someone must have called already. He was right. Within minutes, the faint sound of security radios and footsteps echoed down the walkway. 2 officers arrived, looking slightly overwhelmed by the number of people gathered. One of them asked if everyone was okay and what had happened. The crowd pointed toward Ethan. Not an accusation, but because he was the only one who could explain everything. Ethan stepped forward calmly and told the officers exactly what happened. Nothing more, nothing less. He didn't exaggerate or try to make himself look good. He simply said the bikers were causing trouble, threatening a student, and that he stepped in to stop it from getting worse. One of the officers looked at him strangely, almost like he was trying to understand how a college kid managed to handle a whole biker group without anyone getting seriously hurt. But Ethan didn't offer explanations, and the officer didn't push for them. The officers took notes, spoke to a few witnesses, and confirmed there was no need for an ambulance. The student who had been pushed insisted he was fine and didn't want to make things bigger than they already were. When the officers were done, one of them looked at Ethan and said, "Thank you for helping, but next time, just be careful." Ethan nodded. "I will." As the officers walked away, students slowly started dispersing. Some looked at Ethan with admiration, some with surprise, and some with complete disbelief. A few wanted to talk to him, ask him how he knew what to do or where he learned to move like that. But Ethan didn't stay long. He picked up his bag from the ground, dusted it off, and started walking toward the dorm building, even while walking away. He kept his posture straight and his steps steady, as if the whole situation hadn't shaken him at all. But inside, he wasn't thinking about how he looked. He was thinking about whether things could have gone differently, how dangerous it could have been if Rex had decided to act out of anger rather than fear as he walked. He noticed a few students following behind him, hoping to catch up. He didn't rush, but he didn't slow down either. A couple of them finally managed to reach him. "Hey," one of them said. "That was amazing. Seriously." Ethan smiled politely. "I'm glad everyone is all right." "How did you even do all that?" the student asked. "It looked like you knew exactly what they were going to do before they did it." Ethan didn't look proud. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He just said, "I've trained before. But it's nothing special." Students looked at him like they knew that wasn't true. "You don't move like that without serious training." Another student chimed in. "It was special. If you didn't step in, that guy could have gotten hurt." Ethan didn't argue. He simply nodded and kept walking. He didn't want attention. He didn't want praise. He didn't even want people talking about him. All he wanted was to go back to his room, drop his bag, and breathe. When he finally reached his dorm building, he went inside quietly. The hallway was empty, giving him a moment of silence he didn't realize he needed. He entered his room, placed his backpack on the chair, sat on the edge of his bed. For a moment, he stayed there in silence, letting everything settle in his mind. He wasn't stressed or shaken, but he wasn't ignoring reality either. He knew stepping into a conflict always carried risk, no matter how trained he was. But he also knew that sometimes doing nothing was even riskier. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that he didn't step in because he wanted to fight. He stepped in because someone needed help, and no one else knew what to do. His phone buzzed on the desk. When he picked it up, he saw a message from one of his classmates. "Dude, you're everywhere online right now." Someone posted the video. It already has thousands of views. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. This was the part he didn't want. He didn't want fame, attention, or people turning him into someone he wasn't. He wanted peace, normal days, quiet walks to class. But he also knew he couldn't control what people recorded or shared. All he could do was stay true to who he was. He put the phone down without replying and leaned back on his bed. He thought about the students who had thanked him, officers who had taken notes, and Rex's angry stare before leaving. He knew the day wasn't fully over yet. People would talk. Some would ask questions. Some would exaggerate the story. And some might even look at him differently from now on. But Ethan didn't worry too much. As long as he stayed quiet, respectful, and focused on why he came to college in the first place, things would settle eventually. Still, he couldn't shake one thought from his mind. Today wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something he didn't expect, and something he wasn't fully ready for as he sat there, not sure what the next day would bring. The campus around him slowly returned to normal. But the people who saw what happened wouldn't forget it, and neither would he. The next morning came quietly, but the calm feeling didn't last long. Ethan woke to a soft knocking on his door, followed by the sound of voices in the hallway. At first, he thought it was just students talking on their way to early classes, but then he heard someone say his name, and he sat up fully awake. He took a slow breath before opening the door. Standing outside were two students he recognized from his math class. They weren't close friends, but they always smiled at him when they saw him. Now, they stood there, looking unsure of how to speak. "Hey. Sorry to bother you this early," one of them said, "but people are kind of waiting for you downstairs." Ethan blinked. "Waiting for me?" "Yeah," the other student replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "A lot of people, actually. I think they want to talk to you about what happened yesterday." Ethan didn't know how to respond. He never wanted attention, and the idea of people gathering outside the dorm building because of him felt uncomfortable. Still, he couldn't just hide in his room. That would only make things stranger. "I'll come down," he said softly. He grabbed his bag, took a moment to steady himself, and walked with them down the stairs. As he reached the lobby, he saw a small crowd gathered outside the glass doors: students, a couple of faculty members, and even some people he didn't recognize at all. They weren't pushing or shouting. They were simply waiting. When Ethan stepped outside, the crowd grew quiet, as if everyone wanted to be respectful but didn't know how to start a conversation. A girl stepped forward first. She looked nervous, but determined. We just wanted to say thank you. Not everyone would step in the way you did yesterday. You helped someone who really needed it." Before Ethan could answer, another student added, "People are talking about it all over campus. Everyone saw how calm you were. You didn't try to hurt anyone? You just protected that guy." Ethan didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to attention like this, especially not attention that felt so emotional and honest. He took a moment before answering. "I didn't do anything special," he said quietly. Anyone would have stepped in. But almost everyone around him shook their heads. "No," someone said from the back. "Not everyone would have. That's why it mattered." Ethan felt something shift inside him. He wasn't proud or embarrassed. He was simply moved by their kindness. He had spent so long trying to blend into the background that he never expected anyone to notice him this way. He thanked them softly. And the crowd slowly dispersed as people headed to class. A few stayed behind to ask how he learned to handle things the way he did. But he kept his answers simple. "I've trained before," he said. He didn't go into details. He didn't want to talk about his Marine background unless he absolutely had to. After the crowd faded, Ethan finally made his way across campus. He felt eyes on him, not in a threatening way, but in a curious one. Some students waved. Others simply nodded to him with quiet respect. It felt strange, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of attention that came from appreciation, not gossip. During his first class of the day, his professor paused while taking attendance. She looked at him kindly. "I heard about what happened yesterday," she said. "I just want to say you handled it with responsibility and calm. That's rare, especially in situations that could have turned dangerous." Ethan nodded politely, grateful she didn't push for details after class. He walked out to the campus quad where the sun warmed the ground. Students sat under trees, studying or laughing with friends. Everything looked normal again, yet people still glanced toward him every now and then. As he walked, he heard footsteps behind him. Someone called, "Wait, Ethan." It was the student he had helped the day before. He looked much calmer now, his expression full of sincerity. "Hey," the student said softly. "I didn't get a chance to thank you properly yesterday." "You thanked me," Ethan replied. "No. I mean, really, thank you." The student paused, gathering his thoughts. "I didn't know what was going to happen. They looked angry, and I froze. If you hadn't stepped in," he took a breath, "I don't know what would have happened. So, thank you. For real." Ethan put a hand on his shoulder and gave a small nod. "I'm glad you're okay. That's all that matters." The student smiled, and for a moment everything felt normal again. But things weren't done changing. Later that afternoon, Ethan visited the cafeteria for lunch. He sat alone at a corner table, thinking about everything that had happened over the last 24 hours. He liked quiet spaces, and he hoped to enjoy a peaceful meal before finishing some assignments. But a staff member from campus security approached his table carefully. "Ethan," he said gently, "do you have a moment?" Ethan nodded. "I just wanted to let you know that the bikers from yesterday were identified," the officer said. "They were told they're not allowed on campus again. The administration is taking it seriously." "It's good," Ethan replied. "There's also something else," the officer added. "Some people online are trying to figure out who you are. The videos went everywhere. We can't stop people from posting, but we're monitoring things to make sure nothing unsafe comes from it." Ethan sighed softly. He didn't want attention, not online, not on campus, not anywhere. But he appreciated that security was paying attention. "Thanks for telling me," he said. The officer nodded and walked away. After lunch, Ethan stepped outside into the fresh air. He found a quiet bench near the edge of campus where hardly anyone passed by. It was the first moment all day when he could sit alone and breathe without feeling watched. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sunlight warm his face. He didn't want to think too much about yesterday or today. He just wanted to be still. After a while, he heard a soft voice nearby. "Is it okay if I sit?" Ethan opened his eyes and saw a faculty counselor standing near the bench. She wasn't pushy or formal, just gentle. "Sure," Ethan said. She sat down beside him, leaving enough space to make him comfortable. For a moment, she didn't say anything, giving him time. "I heard about what happened yesterday," she finally said. "I'm not here to question you. I'm here to make sure you're doing all right." "I'm fine," Ethan said honestly. "I believe you," she replied. "But even when things turn out well, it can still feel heavy afterward." "You were calm, but it was still a stressful situation." Ethan listened quietly. "You don't have to talk about anything if you'd rather not," she continued. "Just know the school appreciates how you handled it. You didn't make things worse. You protected someone without hurting anyone. That's a rare balance." Ethan nodded slowly. He didn't feel stressed or overwhelmed, but he appreciated that she cared enough to check. Before leaving, she gave him a small smile. "If you ever need to talk, I'm around." When she left, Ethan leaned back again. He realized something then, something simple but true. Yesterday, he stepped in because it was the right thing to do. But what followed wasn't just the aftermath of a conflict. It was people showing kindness, gratitude, support, even though he preferred quiet days. He couldn't ignore how much the campus had rallied around him. He wasn't alone, even if he liked to think of himself that way. As the day moved on, the buzz around campus slowly faded. People went back to their routines. Though every now and then someone would wave at Ethan or thank him again in passing. By evening, things felt almost normal. Ethan finally returned to his dorm, placed his bag on the desk, and sat down on his bed again, just like the night before. But this time, he didn't feel tired or overwhelmed. Instead, he felt grounded. He felt grateful. He looked out the window at the soft glow of the campus lights. Students walked slowly along the paths, laughing, talking, living their ordinary lives. And Ethan realized something important. What happened yesterday didn't change who he was. It didn't turn him into someone different. It didn't make him a hero. He was still himself, a quiet student who wanted a peaceful life. But it did remind him that doing the right thing mattered. Even when no one expected it, he thought back to the moment when he stepped forward, not knowing how things would end. He didn't act for attention or praise. He acted because someone needed help. And now, sitting there in the stillness of his room, he felt at peace with that. The campus around him continued with its usual rhythm. The crowd, the fear, the tension, it was all in the past now. But the calm that followed stayed with him, steady and warm. And as he closed his eyes, letting the day finally settle, he understood one simple truth. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't make you a hero. It just makes you human. And that was enough for him.